Welcome to Business Legal Lifecycle TV, the live TV show all about the legal aspects of your business to help educate you on complex legal terms in an easy to understand manner, to help understand why you need to do certain things in your business from a legal point of view, and to help you develop a plan for the future. Our mission at Business Legal Lifecycle is to help empower all small to medium-sized businesses around the world to get access to legal advice so that they can help build their communities and make the world a better place. Did you know that any business owner is on average 7 months away from losing everything? That is the average time it takes from a successful business to fold when an aspect of their business is not set up correctly. Have you ever wanted to get legal advice but didn't understand what was going on? Do you feel like there is a divide between lawyers and their clients? Then this TV show is for you. It is all about empowering you and your business with the knowledge and tools to ensure that this doesn't happen to you. Business Legal Lifecycle TV delivers a twice-weekly show focusing on the legal aspects of your business. At lunchtime on Mondays, we present Fast Fix Monday, a quick 5 to 10 minute show that will give you some actionable steps to consider for the week for your business. And at lunchtime on Wednesdays, we present our in-depth show of between 30 minutes and an hour, where we go through complicated legal aspects of your business in a simple to understand, plain English manner. And whether that is through educational pieces or interviews with experts in their fields.
Afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Business Legal Lifecycle TV. I'm Craig Mason. I have with me the other founder of Business Legal Lifecycle, Jeremy. Say good afternoon to our listeners.
Good afternoon, listeners and viewers, of course.
And viewers. Yeah. So today is Wednesday, so it's our longer form show, and at the moment we're doing what we call is a training type show where we're going through a particular phase of the life cycle, and today it's through an interview with Jeremy and myself. And the point of the training is to sort of outline specific things about a particular phase, go through what we might be looking out for if we're talking to someone that's in that phase, the sorts of things that you need to look out for and have in place to go into the next phase of the life cycle. So that's the purpose of today's show, and we'll be doing a training show like this probably once a month going forward on the particular topic. So today, as I said, I am interviewing Jeremy, and we're talking about phase 2 structuring and starting up your business with leases and those sorts of things. So we will kick into the interview, Jeremy, if you're ready to go.
I'm ready. I'm usually the one answering the questions, so I'm looking forward to this.
Alrighty, so just with the topic structure and your business, and the first question I wanted to talk to you about is, why is structure so important at the beginning of your business? Yeah,
and that's a great question, Craig. And I think that the thing to understand is the structure of what you do is the foundation of your business. It really is. It's the foundation of everything that you might look at doing in your business. It's the foundation of what happens at the end. So starting up with an end in mind. There's a lot of different perspectives and a lot of different advice that people will give you over which structure is better for what you're wanting to do. But the advice is really specialized. So getting the structure right is really important. I often hear people say, oh, well, I can just fix it later. Well, that might be right, but there will be consequences. If you transfer businesses, there are tax consequences, both income tax and stamp duty and transfer duty in different states around Australia. So you need to be really careful to think about what you actually are wanting to do and get those foundations right, because in the long run, it could save you a lot of money.
Yeah, absolutely. So you sort of touched on some there, but what are some of the other sort of key considerations that you need to think about when you're structuring your business at the beginning?
Yeah, I think this is a great question, Craig. And I think that the issue here is that no two businesses are the same. And all too often, and we see it all the time with the clients that we act for, that in the law firm, that people think that their situation is the same as their friends. And they go and have a barbecue, or they go and have coffee with a friend who's got a business, and they have a chat to them, and they think that X structure is best for them. The problem with that is that no two people's situation is exactly the same. And whilst at the end of the day that the setup may be similar, there may be subtle differences that you need to understand and that you may not and that you may not appreciate, and your friend may not appreciate. The other thing too is that you may have let's call them skeletons in your closet, or other things that may be different for your perspective that your friend may not have. So I call it well-meaning barbecue advice, because it is well-meaning advice that people give. But what you need to understand is that no two structures are the same, and no two business owners are the same. So you really need to get that specific advice for your situation. And that comes into getting the holistic advice too. So, people who've heard us talk before, Craig, will know that we're very big proponents of holistic advice. So getting advice from your accountant, financial planners, coaches, lawyers. It's really important to get holistic advice. And this is a great opportunity for the lawyers that are watching and listening to build relationships with consultants who will actually give them work. If you just go and start giving tax advice, say, that you're not a specialist in as a lawyer, then you may get that wrong for what the client's accountant actually wants in place. And the advice you may give may be completely right, but that accountant may have a different way of looking at it. So you need to be really careful that you're not giving all the answers. You don't need to give all the answers. And you need to think about, who else can you bring in to this conversation about structuring, so that you can get the holistic advice, so that they all talk to each other and they all understand your position. And the third key consideration that I wanted to mention, Craig, is your goal. And this is something that you and I did very early on in business, and it's been one of the best things we've ever done is thinking about why you're in business. Why are you actually doing what you're doing? And actually having that understanding will help you think about the structure. And so to give an example, there's there's a number of different ways, but there's two main ways to structure a company in a business and a trust. So you could have what we call a trading trust, which would be a company as trustee for a trust. And you might set that up if you're planning to set up a business, trade it for a couple of years and then sell it off, because there are capital gains tax advantages for that. And I'm not going to go into the tax advice. You can talk to your accountant. But that could be a great structure. But if you're planning on owning the business long term, then that can be a terrible structure for income holding. So a trust has to declare and pay tax on all its income every year. And so if you're planning to hold a company for a long time, it may be better that you just trade as a company with trusted shareholders. Sorry, I just had a memory blank there for a second. Trusted shareholders, and that can greatly impact the way that you set up your business. So they're probably the three main considerations to have when you're starting a business. There are many more, but they're the three main ones that people need to understand, and the three main ones that we get across to our clients before they start their businesses.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just give you, just before the next question, could you also just touch on if someone said, oh, look, I've had this structure previously, I haven't used it for a while, why can't I just use that now going into this new business venture? What's a quick sort of summary of what you say to someone if they said that to you?
Yeah, and sometimes that can work. So if they've got a pre-existing structure, that can be a great asset to use moving forward. But it's the great lawyer answer, it depends, because it really does depend. It depends on what that structure did in the past. It depends on what your goal is for the future. It depends what assets and liabilities might be in that company. So you really need to look behind that company, see whether or not it's got tax losses that you might be able to use to offset. It might have potential employee claims. Any business that's been operating and has employees or contractors may have claims by employees that they don't know about that could come up and bite it. So there's a real risk with a previous structure. The best legal position from my point of view is always start a business from scratch, to start it with a brand new entity, whether that be a trust or a company. However, I have had situations where accountants have said, this company's got, this company that we've previously used has got great tax losses that we need to utilize going forward. And there's no other way to use them than by using that company. So we've investigated what liabilities might be attached to the company in the past and determined that that's okay. So it really is, it's a great question, because it's something that does come up, and it does depend. And it's something that you just don't fly blindly into, because there's a lot of things you need to consider before you actually go ahead and do that.
Yeah, absolutely. So last question about structures. You've touched on company and trust. Do you want to give our listeners and viewers some key advantages and perhaps one or two disadvantages for the different structures that are most common?
Absolutely. So anyone who's read my book knows that I go through this in the book, but I'll go through it in a bit of detail now. And I will start out by saying, as to quote our business mentor, Craig, there are many ways to be right. And that's very true with this. So the key advantages and disadvantages, you really need to decide what is best for you. So I'll start with sole trader. Sole trader is if you're trading in your own name. This is the most risky structure to use for your business going forward. Ultimately, a sole trader is personally liable for all of the debts going into the company. So that's a key disadvantage. A key advantage is that you do not have to set up structures. So that costs money to set up companies and trusts, or all those things cost money. And they cost money to maintain because they're separate legal entities. So because they're separate legal entities, they have their own tax reporting regime, and they have to pay their own tax. They have to have their own accounts done. You need your accountant to do different things. So a sole trader is cheaper, especially in the startup and in running costs. But its key disadvantage is that you're personally liable for everything. The second key disadvantage, and I'll get into why this is an advantage for other structures, is that if you make $1 million and you're a sole trader, you pay tax on the $1 million as income. There's no income distribution. There's no ability to do anything with that income other than pay tax on it that you're liable for as a sole trader. So the key advantage is cost saving, but I think that the disadvantages far outweigh that. Now, there are circumstances where a sole trader is an appropriate structure. So if you're a contractor, say a building contractor working for other contractors, it may be that a sole trader is right for you. But they are few and far between. If you're trading any business with any employees, incurring any debts, you really need to think about some of the other structures that I'll talk about now. So the second one is a company. So a key advantage of the company, and I've touched on this a few times, is that it's a separate legal entity. That's a really important concept to understand, that it's separate from the people behind it. So we talked about this last week in show, I think it was 115, about the roles within a structure, which in a company structure, which are the directors and the shareholders. The great thing about a company is that you can own shares in that company and you're not personally liable for any of the debts of that company as a shareholder. The director owns or has the day-to-day management of the company. So the shareholders own the capital in the company and essentially own the company. The directors have the day-to-day management of the company. Now, they can be liable, but only in really rare circumstances. So in Australia, we have this concept of insolvent trading. So if you're incurring debts when you know that you can't pay them, you'll be deemed to be insolvent trading and you'll be personally liable for the debts that you incur. There are also some tax. If you don't pay some tax, the tax officers and the federal government's what we call piercing that corporate veil to get more and more into making directors liable for tax debts to make sure that they're paid. But the key advantage for a company is a separate legal entity from the people behind it. A disadvantage, as I said before, is the cost. Yeah, it costs a little bit of money to set up. It costs money to maintain every year. If the shareholders are just individuals, say that Craig and I were individual shareholders of a company, then whatever income that the company distributes to its shareholders would go to us directly as shareholders, and whatever the difference was between what the company paid in tax and what we had to pay in tax would be taxed on us. And so if we made $1 million each, the company would pay, I think it's 27.5 cents in the dollar at the moment in Australia, different rates in different countries, but we would pay the difference in income tax. So that's a disadvantage of a company just by itself. A trust, and again, I've touched on these before. A trust, we're really talking about family discretionary trusts. If you're in any sort of business partnership, you don't use a family discretionary trust to operate a business. I've seen that before. It's a bad idea. But if you're just a sole person operating a business, then a trust can be a great way to start the business. And especially as I said before, if you're going to sell the business in the future, because if you own an asset, so a company or a business for a year, and the trust sells that asset, then it at the moment gets a 50% capital gains tax discount. I'm not going to go into the details of that, but that can save you a lot of money. There are some rules behind that you need to talk to your accountant on. I started out this by saying we don't give tax advice, but that is a key advantage that you can get if you are using a trust. You can get that. A key disadvantage, and again, I touched on it before, but I will reiterate it here because I think it's important, is that a trust has to pay all tax on all of its income in any year. So it has to pay tax. If it makes $1 million, it has to pay tax on that and distribute that income to its beneficiaries. It has no choice. A company, by contrast, can actually hold funds for the future. So you can pay tax at the company tax rate and not distribute any money to its shareholders. And that's perfectly legal. There's nothing wrong with that. In a trust, you have to distribute money. So again, using Craig and I as an example, you have a company, you could have two trusts as shareholders, and that would mean that our shares were held as a trust, on trust. The advantage of this is the fact that if we made $1 million each as income and that was distributed from the company to the trust could then distribute that income around to our various beneficiaries, to our wives, to our kids, to other family members, if we so chose. So there are great advantages you can have by using a combination of these entities. The last structure that I'll talk about is a unit trust. And I'll just talk about that briefly because unit trusts have really gone out of vogue in probably the last decade or so. So unit trusts are fixed trusts. So you could set up a company, and if you were going to set up a trust to trade a business and you had business partners, a unit trust would be what you would use. So you would use a unit trust, and it's a bit like a company. The people that there are unit holders and they own the units in that trust. So again, using Craig and I as examples, if we had a unit trust and we were 50-50 unit holders, then we would, our trust would receive the income like a company, like I said before, and we could distribute the money according to whoever the unit holder was. A key disadvantage though, again, is like a discretionary trust. Any income that unit trust makes in the year has to be fully taxed and fully distributed. Otherwise, it pays tax at a high marginal tax bracket. One thing that I did forget to say in discretionary trusts that is probably the most important part to understand, and we did touch on this last week in last week's education show, is that when you have a trust, you have different roles in the trust. You've got a trustee and you've got the beneficiaries, and you've got a few other ones, the appointor and the settlor. The settlor sets up the trust. The trustee has the day-to-day control of the trust, and the beneficiaries have the benefit of the income. And then you also have an appointor, which I said before, which is the person who can remove and appoint new trustees. The trustee, and this is a really key concept, the trustee is personally liable for every single debt of the trust. They can just be indemnified out of the trust assets. This is a really important concept to understand because if you are trading a business out of a trust and if it was Jeremy Stretton as trustee for the Stretton Family Trust and I was trading my law firm, I would be personally liable for every single debt that business incurs. I would just have the right to be indemnified out of the trust. So if that trust didn't have enough money to pay a debt that was incurred by my business, I have to pay it. There's no choice on that. So you need to be really clear on that if you're trading a business that you should have a company as trustee for a trust. That's really key and something that's often missed, isn't it, Craig? That we see that all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Sorry. Sorry, you go.
No, have you finished? Is that anything else you want to say about that?
No, I was handing it.
Yeah. So, I mean, as Jeremy said, many ways to be right, and it's imperative to get the advice at the beginning. And as part of that, when you're getting the advice, what I take out of the answers to Jeremy's other questions was that tell your advisor exactly what you want to do with your business and your goals, because the structure you put in place at the beginning, hopefully where possible, can suit your goals going forward and take that into account. So definitely somewhere where you've got to get the right advice and get it at the beginning, and don't rely on too much barbecue advice because.
And one little thing just to flow on from that, Craig, is the fact that it may need to change in the future. It may, if your goals change. The next book, as you know, is Start Up with an End in Mind, which is currently with the publishers. But and the idea around that is to start up with a concept of where you're actually going. Your goals might change. Our goals changed. We've been in business 7 years, and our goals have changed massively over the time. So you've got to understand that what you set up at the beginning may not actually be right long term. But it's better to set it up with something to start with your goal in mind, so that you don't have that problem going forward.
Absolutely.
Yep.
All righty, so that's the questions about structuring. So going on to the next topic, a business owner will set up their structure and hopefully then have a business. and depending on the type of business, they may then need to lease a premises. So I've got a couple of questions about leasing.
Yep.
Why is it important for a business owner to actually have a lease in place?
Yeah, so we're recording this in August 2018, and there's been a big move away from people leasing premises, but there's still a lot of people actually operating businesses from another premises. So the difference here is either operating a business from home, operating a business from, say, a friend's place, or operating a business from someone else's premises. Having an actual lease in place actually protects the business owner in the second and third situation. So if you're renting from home, you probably don't want a lease. Again, this is, I'm not going to go into tax advice, but if you have a lease and you're paying yourself rent, there can actually be capital gains tax issues for your home when you go to sell it if you've tried to claim deductions in the past. But if you're doing that or you want to know more about that, talk to your accountant. There are lots of ramifications for that. If you're subletting from a friend or renting from a third party, then you really need to be careful to actually have a lease in place. The reason for that is the law in Queensland and all around Australia says that if you're a tenant and you don't have an actual lease in place, then you're either a week-to-week tenant, you're a month-to-month tenant, or you could be a year-to-year tenant, and that's based on how often you pay rent. And the law says that if you want to terminate that monthly rent, you basically have to give a month's notice. So if you don't have a lease in place, you could be kicked out of your premises very, very quickly. So it is a massive risk, and that's why leases are really important. The other probably main factor in it is that it actually sets out the rights and responsibilities of both parties. So in a lease, you've got a lessor who owns the premises, you've got a lessee who is the tenant, and a good lease will actually define all of the terms and all of the rights and responsibilities that those parties have to have. And that is really key, because if you're on that premises for 10 years and say the lease changes hands, or the land changes hands, or the lease changes hands, the tenant changes hands, there may be misunderstandings as to what the actual key terms of the lease are. So I think those are probably the two key reasons to actually have a lease in place.
And so if you are going to move into premises and there's a lease, what are the key things that you should be looking out for in the lease when you're talking to the agent to make sure that it's what you need and what you want?
Yeah, so the first one is the type of premises and making sure that it's suitable for what you want. A lot of people miss this, and it's something that a lot of people really, they should be more on top of than they are. So the type of premises needs to suit the business that you want to run. And this can be very important from say if you wanted to run an office from a retail premises or a retail business from an office premises. There are council rules and local government rules around Australia and around the world for our international viewers and listeners that actually determine what type of business you can run from the premises. So you need to investigate that and make sure that the type of premises is right. It also changes, especially in Australia, the type of lease that you can have. So I know that in the UK, they don't have retail shops, but in Australia, we have this concept of a retail shop, and the type of premises for a retail shop and the rules regarding a retail shop are very onerous for both parties. So you need to make sure that you understand what type of premises you're actually leasing. The second one are to really look at the terms of the offer to lease and think about, are they commercial? Lawyers, really, it isn't our job to tell you whether or not you're getting a good deal. We can suggest things that we've seen in other leases, but you need to make sure that the actual terms of the lease that you're entering are commercial, and make sure that you can pay the rent and the other outgoings. And if you're not sure, sit down with your accountant or financial planner and work out whether or not that you can actually do that, actually make the payment. Incentives are becoming, have always been important, but are becoming more and more important. So making sure that you've got incentives. So that's the third point, making sure that you get some sort of incentive. An incentive can mean a rent-free period. It could mean a fit-out contribution. There are many ways to do that. It could be a discount throughout the term of the lease. So incentives are important to understand and know what you're getting. The next thing is the length of the lease. So how long is the lease for? Is it for a year? Is it for 3 years? Is it for 5 years? Is it for 10 years? Is it for 20 years? And what happens at the end of the lease? And are there options to renew? So the length of the lease and what happens at the end of the fourth one. And the fifth one are the requirements of insurance. So in any lease, any formal lease, you're required to have insurance. Some of the fundamentals are public liability insurance. If you've got any sort of glass in the premises, plate glass insurance is often important. So insurance is a really important one too. So Craig, they're the key things to look out for in a lease from our experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, an important document to think about to get the right advice, because you're essentially signing up for, potentially 3-5 years of commitments, monetary commitments for 5 years. So you've got to make sure you get it right, and it's what you need. So get the advice would be the underlying message throughout this. So can you talk about, Jeremy, a real example of where a lease has actually helped a business owner?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm not going to use any names, obviously, but let's call it. There's a business owner with some premises in Wollongabba, and they were actually renting month to month, and so were running a retail shop, and it was month to month, and they found out through the grapevine that the landlord was actually looking at selling the premises, and it was a large premises. So with the lease, if you don't have a lease in place and a new tenant comes in, as I said before, a new landlord comes in, there may be a massive misunderstanding as to what the actual terms and understanding what was in the, what was to be done by the landlord and the tenant. So this tenant found out that the landlord would be buying the business, and she'd been in business for about 3 years. It was operating really well, really liked the premises. The foot traffic she got from being in the Wollongabba area in Brisbane was really good. And she got worried because she found out that the landlord was selling the premises. So she was talking to her financial planner, who said that didn't sound right and that she should go and get some legal advice. So she came and spoke to us, and we're actually able to put a lease in place. Now, this was really important because the landlord had a complete misconception with the tenant over what was actually meant to be happening with the premises. She understood that the landlord was happy for her to stay there long term, but it turned out that he was actually thinking about bringing someone else in because he had no idea what she was doing. So there had to actually be no communication between the two. And she was actually able to negotiate a commercial lease for quite a substantial period of time and secure herself when the new landlord came in. So the danger there was that the old landlord told the new landlord, oh, this tenant's not going to stick around for long, look for a new tenant, and then kick her out when she'd been operating this great business that was doing really well. And so she was able to actually build a really good business and then have a good lease in place. And to take that even further, she was then able to sell the business later on for a better price because she actually had a proper lease in place. So getting a lease where you're renting premises from someone else, really, it protects you, but it really puts those position in place to really understand what the rights and responsibilities are and expectations are for both parties. So there's many other examples that we could give, but that's a good example of where having a lease actually really helped a business owner and stopped something bad from happening to their business.
Excellent. All right. So moving on from leases, I just have one question about franchises.
Mm-hmm.
And I know we could probably have a whole education show on franchises and the benefits and the problems with starting a business as a franchise. But can you just touch on a few benefits and a few problems for starting a business as a franchisee?
Yeah, absolutely. As you say, there's whole shows, and we've done seminars on this for our clients. So here we're talking, as you say, about businesses that are starting as a franchisee. So the benefits really are that you should be buying a proven system. And if it's done correctly, it can be a really great thing to do. So if you're buying a business starting a business as a franchisee, you get all of the systems and procedures, or you should get all the systems and procedures of that business. You get and should get the right to use the trading name of that business, the trademarks of that business, and the brand. If it's done correctly, franchises can be great. The problems, though, is that there are lots of dodgy operators out there. There really are. We see them all the time. There are people who are starting franchises that shouldn't be starting franchises. They don't have the right systems and procedures and policies in place. They don't have the right education for their franchisees in place. And what that causes is it causes the franchisees to set up incorrectly. So they may have great intentions and everyone might think that everything's going to go well, but if they're not set up correctly, then that can really cause problems. The first real way to see whether that's a problem is to see if they have a good manual. So a good manual of running a business should be very, very lengthy. It should cover off on every single little aspect of the business that you may not even think about. I've seen manuals that are this thick. I've seen manuals that are this thin. the ones that are this thick might seem to be a bit painful, but they really do cover everything. And so you know that if you've got a good manual in place, that it really does protect you, and it really means that the franchisor has actually put some good thought into what they're actually setting up as a franchise to make sure that you're getting some good value for what you're paying for. Don't just buy something because you think it sounds nice. Do the investigation. And the last thing to understand, if you're starting as a franchisee, at the end of the franchise, you will most likely be left with nothing for all your hard work. This is something that a lot of franchisees don't realize. Say if you go and buy a chicken franchise, I won't use any names, but if you go and buy a takeaway chicken franchise and you trade that business for 10 years, you make lots of money out of it, or you work long hours, and you might think, oh, I've had enough of this franchise, I'll go and set up my own business. More often than not, a franchise agreement will actually have a restraint of trade in there. Now, whether or not that's enforceable is a question that you probably don't want to spend the money with us lawyers to find out whether or not it actually is enforceable. But also, at the end of a franchise, the franchisor doesn't have to grant a new franchise. Now, often they will if everything's going well, but you may be left with nothing. So when you go into a franchise, you really need to understand what you're getting yourself in for. You really honestly are, in a lot of cases, buying yourself a job for a long period of time. And that can be great. If that's what you want, if that's where you want to go, no problems. There's many ways to be right, as we say. But you just need to understand that and not go in thinking that you're going to end up with this great business that you're going to be able to go and start up a competing franchise. And the great franchises of the world, the fast food franchises that have got hundreds of thousands of franchisees around the world, they don't have these problems because they're aligned. So I think probably the key, and I've acted for a lot of franchisees and a lot of franchisors over the years. The key is really to get aligned with your franchisor, understand what they're doing, make sure they understand where you're going, and make sure that that's an alignment. And if there's any problems, it's like having a business partner, because they are a business partner. Don't go into business if you're not aligned with each other's goals. And that's very true with the franchise. So as Craig said, we could do a whole hour-long, probably 3-hour-long talk on the benefits and problems of starting a franchise and what to look out for. But they're some of the key things. Look for a proven system. And if you don't have a good manual, then question it greatly, because they probably haven't put the thought process that's required for a good franchise and have a good system in place.
Yeah, excellent summary. I think, again, get the advice, ask the questions, don't just rush into buying a franchise. It's like with anything, you're spending a lot of money, you've got to make sure you're getting what you're paying for. So, all right, that's franchises. Just one question before we move on to some regulations, government regulations, and same with franchises, a whole code of conduct in relation to franchises. So before we move on to that, just with insurances in your business. So, most people understand insurance, life insurance, those sorts of things, but what insurances are important for a business to have in place?
Yeah, this is really important because a lot of people don't think about this. There's probably 5 main ones that I'll talk about, and I'll just say at the outset that I'll talk about what they are. But if you're starting a business, you really should go and talk to a good insurance broker. A good insurance broker will be able to set you up with the good insurance policies that'll really set you up for success going forward, and making sure that you're getting the right deal. The other great thing about an insurance broker is that, 1, they can get you the best deal, but 2, if you need to make a claim, they can help you. And those insurance policies and dealing with insurance companies can be right royal pains. So, because there's lots of holes that hoops that you've got to jump through. So you got to make sure that you actually, if you're using a broker, that can actually help you quite a bit. So the five different types of insurance are general liability. So this is what's often called public liability insurance. And this is insurance, say someone slips and falls on your premises walking downstairs, that covers you in case that happens. Really important if you're leasing premises, or if you've got customers even coming to your own home, to make sure that you've got general liability insurance, so that if something accidentally happens to them, and we're talking about just accidents here, that they're covered. The second type is product liability. So if you've got any sort of product that you've got in your business, you need to have product liability insurance. And this basically covers you in case of any loss or damage that's suffered by clients or customers or third parties as a result of your product. The third, and this is really important if you're a professional, is professional liability insurance. So if you're giving any sort of advice, having professional liability insurance is really important. Everyone is human. People make mistakes. You need to make sure that you've got insurance to cover you just in case that happens. And it may be expensive, but it's really important. Some industries, like us lawyers and accountants, have required insurances. Like lawyers actually have one in Queensland, have one insurance body that actually does professional liability for our whole profession. So you need to make sure that you have that. The fourth that's really important is workers' compensation insurance. If you've got employees or contractors, you need to have workers' compensation insurance. It's compulsory and you have to pay a premium for that in Australia. I know that it's compulsory in other countries around the world as well, but that's the fourth type of really important compensation. And this is to cover if your employees get injured on the job, say some boxes fall on them or they hurt themselves in any way, then workers' compensation covers the loss and damage that they suffer if that happens whilst they're at work. And it can also cover to and from work. I had a client, an accountant friend of ours, who had an employee who had an accident on the way to work, and workers' compensation actually covered that accident where it wasn't their fault. So there are some technicalities there, but you need to understand that the workers' compensation does apply to and from work as well. And I will throw in any team events that you might have, staff or team events. If you're out having company drinks, then workers' compensation insurance could cover that situation as well. And the fifth really important one is business interruption insurance. There are lots of events that can happen that are completely outside your control, floods, earthquakes, all manner of things that can shut down a business without even you even thinking that they might happen. Business interruption insurance is there to cover you for the loss of profit or income in some situations if your business is interrupted because of an event that's outside your control. This is one that you shouldn't just go to your insurance company and buy. You should make sure that you talk to a broker, someone who's seen it before, because it's really important to make sure that you get that right. So they're the 5 main types of insurance that you should have in place for any business owner, and really depending on the different types of business that you run.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, get the advice. Insurance, super important. Last topic I want to talk about, Jeremy, is where the government gets involved and they have their regulations in particular industries.
Yep.
So why would it be important to understand the government regulations that are around for your particular business that you're starting up?
Yeah. This is a really important topic, and I'll give a story just quickly. At the end, so we're recording this at the end of August. The beginning of August, 2018. The end of July, I did a seminar near our Caboolture office where we had some business owners talking about the business legal lifecycle and various other topics. And we started talking before the presentation about what was the biggest impediment to business owners, and they all said government regulation and red tape. There is so much red tape out there that you may not understand. There's so many regulations, so many problems. Now, a lot of the time you may not realize that there are rules in place for your business, and they change on an ongoing basis. Now, why do they change? Why is this? Well, the government regulations are there to really protect the consumers and to protect an industry. So, for instance, lawyers, can't be, you can't be a lawyer unless you're properly qualified. You can't be a doctor if you're not appropriately qualified. You can't be a dentist if you're not appropriately qualified. You can't be a builder if you're not appropriately qualified. The law has stepped in, and the governments have stepped in to add obligations on people who are running certain types of businesses to have certain qualifications to make sure that they are a minimum standard. So that's where regulations are important. But there are other regulations, such as food safety standards. If you're running any sort of business that provides any sort of food, you need to provide and comply with the food safety regulations. And we talked about this a little bit in show 115, the education show. A lot of people don't realise that their business is subject to the continuing regulation and food safety standards. Builders have to have a QBCC license, and they have to comply with certain requirements of income and assets in their company. So it's really hard to understand all the regulations. No one person has all the answers. So how do you find out the answers? Is probably a question that you're asking now. So the first port of call should be your lawyer, or maybe a business mentor, someone in the industry that's done it before. They'll know a lot of that. Most industries that have regulation have industry bodies. So lawyers have the Queensland Law Society, accountants have the CPA and CA associations. There are lots of, I think there's the IPA, the Institute of Public Accountants, and there are other a matter of other bodies out there that can actually help. Builders have the Master Builders Association. There are other industry bodies that can actually help with the making sure that you understand the government regulations. Sign up for their newsletters as well, because the newsletters will often talk about changes that are coming into the industry and the regulation of the industry, so that you can be across it. Understand that your lawyers and consultants can't necessarily be across it all, because there's so many often changing, moving beasts, moving beast of regulations. So government regulation is really important. Make sure that you understand that your industry is probably regulated, and keep your ear to the ground for any changes that might happen, and be across it, because ignorance of the law is no excuse.
No, absolutely not. There's a term that's thrown around a lot in this sort of area with legislation, and it's misleading and deceptive conduct. So what is it, and how does it apply in the context of a business owner?
Yeah, so business owners are subject to this regime called misleading and deceptive conduct. And basically what it means is you can't mislead or deceive people whilst you're carrying on business. Sounds pretty simple. But there are a lot of people who do try to skirt the edges of this. So I'm not going to go into a great lot of detail about it, except to say that you've got to be honest and not get clients or customers based on deceit or misleading them to come into your business. You need to make sure that what you're doing is right. And how does it apply? This is really important to understand, that people can sue you if they believe that you've misled them or deceived them. And also the government bodies like the ACCC, the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission, can actually commence proceedings against you and prosecute you, and you can be fined if you are shown to mislead or deceive people in your business. So it's something to be really important about. People that skirt the edges, really, it's just not worth it, because you will get found out, and you can be up for lots of fines and lots of heartache, because normally the ACCC, and we talk about it in our legal update every month, the ACCC will release lots of press releases if people have been prosecuted on that. So don't get involved in misleading and deceptive conduct.
Good advice. Last question. You've touched on tax sort of throughout a number of the answers, but why is tax so important to get right when you're a business owner?
Yeah, tax, you have to pay tax. A lot of people don't like paying tax. They think that it's something that they shouldn't have to pay. But it is something you have to pay, no matter where you are. Your tax is, it's a price that we pay for living in a civilized society, essentially. And, it's a price we pay for our roads. It's a price that we pay for, getting running water to our houses, electricity to our houses. We do pay extra fees on that, but that is often subsidized, and the infrastructure was built on taxpayer money. So taxes are really important to get right. It's really important to make sure that you provision for your tax. Tax isn't your money. Tax is something that you've got to collect for the government. So in Australia and a lot of other countries, we have a value-added tax, which is called the goods and services tax. It's, at the time of recording, it's 10%, may change. But that's not your money. You're collecting that on behalf of the government. Your employees' tax that they have to pay as well, that you collect for them and remit to the government. That's not your money. It's your employees' money that is to be paid to the government. So tax is really important to get right. The other reason is that the tax office, quite rightly, does not like people not paying. So they want you to pay your tax on time, and they will come after you. They do it all the time. I was at a seminar yesterday that was talking about the new safe harbour provisions for insolvent trading, which I won't go into, but there are new provisions around that. And we were talking about, they were talking about the number of people who don't pay their tax on time, and companies that are liquidated. And there's a surprisingly large amount of people that do it. And so the ATO have all the power and resources of the federal government behind them, and they will come after you for the money that you actually owe. So tax is important for a number of reasons. It's important because it helps you to live in a civilized society. It helps you to get the services that you require, but also you don't have a choice on whether to pay or not. So make sure that you provision for it, and that you don't fall foul of the tax man, because if you do, they can shut you down really, really quickly.
Absolutely. Alrighty, so they're all the questions I had for you today, Jeremy. Thank you for your answers and advice. I know the listeners and viewers would have got a tremendous amount of value from that, and I think the underlying sort of theme behind all of this sort of stuff is that, you know, get your education from things like what we're sending out to the listeners and the viewers, but you really need to get specific advice from your consultants when you're entering into these sorts of transactions, be it a lease or a new structure. So is there anything else you wanted to add that you think is important for our viewers in conclusion?
Yeah, look, I think you've hit the nail on the head there, Craig. There are many ways to be right. There are many different things that may change your circumstances from someone else. So get advice. Do not just rely on what we're saying here and go, oh, well, yeah, Jeremy, you know, in that interview said that, you know, I can set up a company and because I'm going to trade my business for the next 10 years. That may not be right for you. Honestly, that may not be right for you. I can't give you the advice on this. I can give you the insights and understanding of the kind of considerations that we have, but pay the money for the advice up front and you will save money in the long run. You and I have seen, Craig, so many examples of people who have not got the advice early and it has cost them in the long run. Pay the money now and you will save the money in the future is really the message from this. And it's something that, yes, I've said a lot and you've said before, but I think it's really important that everyone understands.
Yeah. Excellent. All right. So thank you everyone for tuning in. As we said, we'll be doing a show similar to this every sort of month or so. If you've got any questions or anything you wanted to add to what we've been saying, please comment on Facebook or wherever else you might be watching or listening to this. Jeremy is open to any other questions as well about any of the topics that we've touched on today. So thanks for joining us. We'll be back again on Monday for Fast Fix Monday. Obviously, thank you, Jeremy, for your time and your valuable advice.
Thanks, Craig. It was a pleasure.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.